very good morning to you, Jim. It's a beautiful day here in Belfast, and it's great to be recording together again. I was really interested, just by way of introduction, to see that Elon Musk has taken a significant share in Twitter. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was fascinating, really unexpected. It just shows you the power of money and the influence of money on the values of big corporates. We're actually going to talk about that later on, but I thought it was really interesting and quite positive, actually. I have a lot of time for Elon Musk.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. We could almost do an episode entirely on Elon Musk, but today we're excited to discuss the Metaverse, a new concept really that came to the fore at the end of last year when Facebook announced it was changing its name to Meta. And Mark Zuckerberg described the Metaverse as the next chapter in the story of the internet.
Yeah, I'm conscious, Ollie, that quite a few listeners might be tempted to skip this episode because on first hearing it sounds like a rather nerdy subject. And I'm probably going to reinforce that prejudice for the first 5 minutes when we talk about online gaming. But before people switch off, do me a favour. Take a look at the smartphone sitting beside you and think how central it is to your life. I mean, the mobile internet has revolutionised our lives. Well, here's the thing. The Metaverse will have an even bigger impact on the lives of your children, and its theological implications are vast. So I think anyone who is already a parent or who thinks parenthood might be part of their future should grit their teeth and think this subject through.
And Jim, we love a nerdy topic, so actually our listeners will be well prepared for that. The challenge we face in this conversation is that it's difficult to explain what the metaverse actually is without sounding like an IT lecturer. So to find a way into this topic, let's think about the world of online gaming for a moment. Once we've worked out what the metaverse concept actually is, then we can reflect for a while on its implications for Christians.
Okay, now it's important to say that the metaverse isn't just a souped-up version of a gamer, wearing a VR headset, shooting up countless thousands of innocent orcs. In the end, it has very little to do with gaming. But some of the ideas on which it's based can best be illustrated by thinking about games like Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft.
And are these games you've played, Jim?
No, I did play World of Warcraft once as part of a team day at work, and I was so bad at it that my opponents killed me by jumping up and down on my head so they didn't have to waste ammunition.
Okay, and that was in the virtual space, I'm hoping. But before we talk about those games, let's go back a few years and think about an online game called Second Life. Some people have described the metaverse as an evolution of that particular game.
Yeah, I had a weird introduction to Second Life. That was way back in 2007. I was in San Jose. I was visiting the Oracle campus. And one of the executives I met invited me out to an ice hockey game. And it was really kind of him, but the experience was lost on me because I'd forgotten my glasses and the puck was moving so fast. It is the fastest moving sport. I don't know if you've ever been. I had no idea what was going on. Anyway, this guy had just joined Oracle after selling his own company to them for $4 billion. So he had every reason to be feeling happy and fulfilled. But then he started talking about the hours and hours he spent on this game called Second Life. Now, it's one of those games that provides players with a virtual world, which they build up a virtual life, building houses and businesses and relationships with other virtual players. And every player is represented as an avatar in the game. So the avatar is your persona, your representative in the virtual world. It has an age and a sex and a name, and you can dress it whatever way you wish. Anyway, this incredibly successful, driven businessman had created an avatar who was a sort of aging hippie. And he had built a second-hand bookstore in the Second Life world and a jazz club. In fact, he had formed a jazz band with some other players, and they shipped audio files to each other, mixed them, and then put on concerts. And I left that conversation feeling a little bit sorry for him, if you can feel sorry for anybody with $4 billion. But anyway, but I understood the psychological desire to fly away from the responsibilities of real life and just be someone else for a while.
Yeah, well, obviously we finished our episode last week, Jim, with you expressing your desire to be a jazz trumpeter. I mean, this provides the perfect opportunity. It's almost too good to be true.
If you ever see a mystery jazz trumpeter appear on the Metaverse, you will know who to blame.
But Second Life in particular, it's no longer an important game in today's market, but other games have come along that support people's desire to have another life in a virtual world. Even kind of simple, seemingly silly games like Farmville, in which players engage in farmland management and they plow land and they plant and they grow things and they harvest their crops and raise livestock. And millions of people have spent billions of hours planting and harvesting virtual crops on Farmville.
Yeah, and you start to approach the metaverse concept when we think about games like Roblox or Fortnite or Minecraft. Now, those game platforms they allow large numbers of people to come together to play games and so forth, and to invent games in a virtual world. And they also allow users to buy and sell virtual items like clothing or fashion items. The really interesting thing about Fortnite is the blending of the real and the virtual world. There is apparently a pop singer called Ariana Grande, if that's how you pronounce the girl's name.
I think it's close. I think it's Ariana Grande. I think it's
Ariana Grande.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever had to you've usually helped me correct pronunciation of some obscure philosopher. So I'm really happy that I've been able to help you.
It sounds actually like a special brew from Starbucks. But anyway, she launched her world tour on Fortnite in front of a virtual audience of millions. I mean, and apparently there were giant floating bubbles in the sky, and there was a ride on a glittering llama. There's something that we should all want to do. There's a castle in the sky, and then finally the pop star herself emerged from a crack in the ground to smash all of her fans with a bejeweled hammer. So that strange blending of a surreal virtual world and the real world came together for that concert.
Yeah, and these games illustrate the sort of experience that technology makes possible. But at the end of the day, they're just games. So how does the metaverse differ from a games platform like this?
Okay, that's the key question. Why is Citibank predicting that the metaverse could be a 13 trillion industry by 2030? And the answer is the metaverse will become the default way we work, the way we spend our leisure time, in fact, the way we exist. And so I'm going to gallop through three key features of the metaverse just to build up a rough picture of how it might work. And the first thing to say is that the metaverse offers a sense of presence. It will place everyone inside an embodied or a three-dimensional version of the internet. So we will constantly be within the internet rather than having access to it. We'll be able to interact with billions of other people in this rich, immersive environment. For those who want the full experience, the metaverse will be seen and felt through virtual reality headsets and haptic gloves, but others will eventually just use VR glasses.
Yeah, and many of the avatars we see in games today, they're not massively realistic. So how will we achieve genuine interaction with friends or work colleagues in a 3D rendered space?
Maybe the best way to explain that is to talk about a project that Google have going at the moment. It's called Starline. So imagine, Ollie, that you are sitting in Sydney, Australia, and I'm in Belfast, okay? So we each enter a Starline booth. And we get to view a three-dimensional rendering of the other, okay? So we really feel that we're in the presence of each other, as if we're sitting on the other side of the table, as we actually are at the moment. Now, that requires a whole lot of interesting technology, things like depth sensors and multidimensional light field displays and spatial audio. But our facial expressions would be tracked by cameras that use infrared sensors to track 30,000 points in our faces in real time. All that data is then compressed and transmitted through the fiber optic cables that lie under the ocean, and then they are rendered on the avatars in the booths in which we sit.
It sounds amazing, and that could potentially be how we record this podcast in the future, Jim. That would be remarkable, and sounds a level up from Zoom. And I can see how that would be really useful in the workplace. People could work from home, but you still get that sense of presence in a virtual office.
Yeah, so that's the thing we call presence. The second concept is called mirroring. The metaverse will create a mirror image of the real world. And probably the best way to explain that idea is to talk about Microsoft's flight simulator program. It's actually a magnificent...
I used to play it. No, I used to play it. Yeah, I had a joystick and all. I
thought you were mocking me.
No, I did.
It is a magnificent piece of software, but I can't think about it without laughing because each year coming up to Christmas, as you know, we put on a Christmas meal for our senior members. And we try to put on some gentle entertainment beforehand. Anyway, one year, someone had the bright idea to use Microsoft's flight simulator to provide our older folk, with a panoramic view of Northern Ireland's famous landmarks. We hope to take them on a virtual journey over the Mournes, over Strangford Lough and on up to the north coast. But unfortunately, the guy controlling the simulator got lost. And for the next 5 minutes, 100 rather bewildered seniors flew over mile after mile of the Irish Sea. They didn't have a clue what was going on. But the interesting thing about this Microsoft's product is that it is extraordinarily realistic. There are petabytes of data, and they render every building on the planet, every geographical feature. But the really astonishing thing is that it is accurate in near real time. So if there is a storm raging over the Atlantic at this moment, I can fly through that storm in the simulator, and the cloud formations are accurate. So that's an example of how a virtual world can mirror the real world at a much more prosaic level. Modern cameras can already render every object in your house or your office, allowing a three-dimensional model to be rendered in the metaverse.
So I might be able to shop in a specific Tesco store while sitting in my armchair at home.
That's right. And if I decided to go shopping at the same time, we might well bump into each other. Now, this concept of mirroring the real world is going to become really important when we introduce robots into the story. So, instead of being represented by an avatar in the virtual world, I might be represented by a robot in the real world. So, imagine I'm sitting at my desk in my workplace wearing a VR headset and some haptic gloves, but my robotic presence is performing surgery on a real person in Africa. Now, that's actually not a great example. Not only because I'm not a surgeon, but because...
A terrifying example.
Yes, but in actual fact, the reason it's not realistic is that in the long term, AI-controlled robots will be better surgeons than humans. But anyway, you get the point about mirroring.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about presence and mirroring. What's the third feature of the metaverse?
The third thing is permanence. So this is one of the biggest differences between gaming and the metaverse. Games can be reset. I just restart the game and begin all over again. Even in really complex games like Fortnite, there's no permanence. If I chop a tree down in Fortnite, only 99 people will ever know that I did. And after, a minute or two, or certainly 25 minutes, the tree will simply reappear as it was before my act of vandalism. But the metaverse will provide continuity of identity and history and comms. So all my activities over my lifetime will be stored in the metaverse. Now, that matters a lot because we actually will be able to own things in the metaverse. Now, it's probably going to make the heads of some listeners melt. Because at the moment, the fact that I'm, a level 88 warrior on World of Warcraft is... I
really hope that's true. Please let that be true.
I assure you I am not.
Oh.
But that, even if I was, it would be valueless in the real world.
There's been a lot of talk on Twitter about so-called non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. They provide a way for someone to own and display something in the digital space that is unique. It can't be copied. So everyone knows that they own it. And some digital artists have sold their art as NFTs and gained nearly $90 million through the sale.
Yeah, it will allow someone, again, not me, to buy a limited edition digital Versace dress, for example, that their avatar might wear for an online concert. So the dress won't exist in the real world, but it's a way of showing off in the virtual world. A huge amount of money is already pouring into buying digital property, buying little plots of virtual land that only exist in the metaverse. And you can see the sense of that, I think, for retailers who want to be part of a trendy online shopping mall, for example. I think it was our second episode, Ollie, when we talked about money. And in that discussion, I was a little bit dismissive of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because at the moment they're little more than a speculative bubble, a sort of Ponzi scheme. But they might play an important role in the metaverse because they break the power of the huge corporates like Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. So cryptocurrencies will almost certainly drive commerce in the metaverse, allowing us to own virtual stuff.
Interesting. So you believe there is actually a future then for some of these cryptocurrencies?
Yes, within the metaverse.
Very interesting. So when you put all that discussion together then, we might describe the metaverse as the world in which we will work, spend our leisure time and exist. And we won't access the metaverse. We'll actually live within it. We'll feel a sense of presence when we're in it. We'll have the ability to mirror the real world when that's necessary. And the metaverse will also maintain a permanent record of who I am, my history, and what virtual objects I own. And that sounds remarkable on the one hand and slightly terrifying on the other. And I guess my main fear, Jim, regarding the metaverse vision concerns the enhanced possibilities of manipulation and crime. And we already live in a world where social media platforms and big tech are shaping the way that we think. And the metaverse seems like it'll just ramp that up to another level entirely. So my question is, as Christians, what should our reaction to this vision of the future be?
Well, I think your instinctive reaction is spot on. And let's just unpack what you said a little bit there. But before we do that, let's abide by a good principle. When critiquing anything, it's important to be balanced. So there are good and wholesome innovations up ahead. But there are also some rather frightening risks that we need to think about. And those risks can be categorized as ones that operate at the level of the individual, at the level of society, and then at the deepest level, the level of theology. So, in the interest of balance, we should say that the metaverse concept contains some really innovative and potentially helpful technology. So, imagine a birthday party for an 80-year-old grandmother. Her family is spread all over the world. But when everyone puts on their VR glasses and switches on spatial audio, it's as if they're all together in grandmother's house. The virtual room is full of chatter and happy noise. Everyone has a sense of real presence. Or those of you who have endured the sheer loneliness of working from home during the pandemic, imagine what it would be like if you could enjoy the prospect of office life in a metaverse with all the social interaction that you would get, allowing you perhaps only to commute 2 days a week. Or a really practical thing, imagine your sink is leaking, so you go shopping in the metaverse. You show the sales assistant in the local B&Q store your faulty sink connector. You have a friendly chat for a while and then you buy the relevant item, and 2 hours later the new part is delivered to your door by a driverless vehicle. Now, all those opportunities are morally good, or at least morally neutral, but the sound of theological alarm bells can be heard in the distance, and we should heed them all. By the time Christians woke up to the dangers posed by smartphones and social media, it was too late. So we need to think deeply about what this technology could lead to.
And you mentioned that the risks could be categorized into 3 groups, and the first group of risks apply to us as individuals. What are those risks?
It's been fashionable for a number of years to sneer at the sitcom called The Big Bang Theory. But at the risk of voicing an unpopular opinion, I still find it very funny. I do. And there's one episode in which Penny becomes obsessed with an online game. It's a sort of World of Warcraft thing, where the players go on quests. And if they're successful, they gain entry into the higher levels of the game. In her real life, Penny's career is not going well. She hasn't landed a single acting job. She's stuck as a server in the local cheesecake factory. So she retreats into the online space, never leaves her apartment, and loses interest in regular hygiene. Now, that's just a silly sitcom plot. But it does perhaps illustrate why gaming can become so obsessive. It provides the illusion of winning, of achievement. Now, the danger is that the metaverse becomes fatally attractive to people who have found no sense of achievement in the real world. So they retreat behind their avatar, who of course will be better looking and a more athletic version of the real person. Now, I can just hear the cries of "that's unfair" from my nerdy friends. But there is a terrible risk that we invent a world that reduces life to a collection of games that we play. We choose the ones that appeal to us, usually the ones we're quite good at playing. In a sense, the metaverse is the logical destination of a society that is entertaining itself to death. We've given up on the idea that life has objective meaning, that it has intrinsic purpose, significance, and value. And so we play games that maintain the illusion of meaning. Game playing in its widest sense has another toxic feature. One of the key features of reality, of the real world, is that our actions have consequences. You bump into a rock, it will hurt. But life in a virtual world offers this poisoned hope of a life without consequences, a life that is free from real responsibility. So the big risk to us as individuals is that we are encouraged to invent meaning and escape real responsibility.
The metaverse is obviously going to have a revolutionary effect on society. Its impact will be greater than the invention of the smartphone. And as a result, Jim, what are the risks we face as a society with this technology?
Okay, I'm going to unpack what you said at the start of this segment. I can think of 2 main risks at this level. The first is we have actually no idea what the final shape of the metaverse will be. I mean, we have tried our best in this discussion to paint some sort of a picture of the future. But the truth is that no one knows how it will turn out. Now, when you think about that, it's a scary position to be in. I mean, it's one thing to be in the backseat of a car that's being driven by someone who's determined to reach a particular destination. It's a much worse thing to be in the backseat of a car that's driving at high speed, but there's no one at the wheel. And that picture of no one at the wheel illustrates what a really profound thing that's wrong with Western society. We're playing with all sorts of dangerous technologies, but there are no moral grown-ups steering society to a safe destination. There is no one at the wheel. I mean, look at technologies such as gene editing, or autonomous drones and warfare, or the stuff we've been talking about here. There's no moral framework we can use to say what is permissible and what's not. We just invent cool stuff and then see where it takes us. It's like giving a child a machine gun to play with. Technology has a profound impact on our lives. And yet, who is leading the thinking about what will be good or bad for society in the long term? Politicians? Of course not. The conversation simply can't occur because as a society we have jettisoned the moral vocabulary needed for genuine public discourse.
A long time back, Jim, in season 2, we published an episode called The Rise of the Machines. And during that episode, we talked about the Chinese government's plan to introduce what it calls a social credit system. A vast network of street cameras is linked to an AI system that also harvests data from social media and mobile phones. And the AI system then monitors and evaluates the activities of each Chinese citizen to rank his or her level of trustworthiness. The trust score allocated by the AI system affects one's eligibility for a mortgage, one's chance of getting a job, and the school placement of one's children. Could the metaverse concept not be used in a similar way as an instrument of social control?
I think it absolutely could. You sent me a message on WhatsApp of that weird moment where there's a drone flying around warning people not to sing or stand on the balconies.
Yeah. Almost like it said something, the drone, there was a voice coming from the drone saying, resist your soul's desire for freedom, to these people locked up in their house because of COVID regulations. Quite dystopian vibes.
I sent that. I mean, the main reason I mentioned that is to show that the sending of weird WhatsApp messages is not a one-way street.
Yes, that's fair enough, to be honest.
Now, it's interesting when you compare China with the West, because I think in the West we're actually already quite far down the road of social control. But in the West, the control is not exerted directly by the state. It comes from the big corporates in the digital space. So in China, control is exerted by the party. In the West, it is exerted by Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Just look at the political power wielded by Twitter when it banned Donald Trump from its platform. And to go back to our opening statement, look at how the influence of Elon Musk's money may revert that decision. Who knows? But think about the millions and millions of dollars poured into lobbying on behalf of the LGBT movement by Apple. And then, of course, there are the investment funds. I think this is perhaps the biggest source of power, social control in the West. The investment funds like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Those three on their own control over $34 trillion. So they wield enormous power over businesses. I read an article last week that argued that Disney's drive to promote transgender ideology to infants, that drive comes from pressure from those big investment funds. Now, all that power to control society will be increased dramatically by the adoption of the metaverse. So your point about social control is really well made. It's a huge risk.
Up to this point in the conversation, Jim, we haven't even mentioned the concept of origins. Throughout the season, we've argued that in order to understand something, we should work out where it came from. And at a superficial level, we could chart the origin of the metaverse from its roots in 3G networks and the early days of the internet. But at a philosophical level, its roots run far, far deeper. When we think of the metaverse from a theological perspective, where can we trace its origin point back to?
We can trace it back to Christianity's oldest enemy, the philosophy called Gnosticism. Now, back in the days when the Equip project was a live event for students, my audience used to operate a game called Jim Bingo. They did. They awarded themselves points every time I used words like postmodernism, worldview, or individualism. But they all got a bonus point whenever I used the term Gnosticism. It was a cruel sport, of course, but I think I deserved it. Anyway, the point is that you and I bandied this term Gnostic and Gnosticism around quite a bit on the podcast, Ollie, but I'm not sure we've ever really explained it. So give me a couple of minutes to explain the thing, and then we'll apply it to the metaverse.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. We'll give you time to explain that. But I think Jim Bingo is definitely going to make a comeback after this episode. I'm trying to figure out how I could coordinate that via Instagram. But there's definitely a place for Jim Bingo in all of our lives. But do crack on and explain Gnosticism to us.
Well, the first thing to say about Gnosticism is that it's actually a complicated mix of different and often incoherent ideas. But there is what the historian Kurt Rudolph calls a central myth. So Gnostics believe that there is something terribly wrong with the universe. But they don't say that the universe is a good world created by a good creator, which then went bad. They say that the creator was bad and incompetent. So Gnostics see who we call God the Father as an incompetent lesser God. Behind him, they say, is this unknowable true God who has nothing to do with the creation of the physical world. So the Gnostic Gospel of Philip says, the world came about through a mistake, for he who created it wanted to create it imperishable and immortal, but he fell short of attaining his desire. So the creator, who the Gnostics believe to be a substandard deity, produced a result that was a material cosmos soaked with ignorance and pain and decay and death. I mean, a real botched job. I'm leaning very heavily on Douglas Groothuis here for this segment, and he says of the Gnostic view of God, this deity despotically demands worship and even pretentiously claims his supremacy as the one true God. So that's a very odd idea. Well, what about the Gnostic view of human beings? Well, say the Gnostics, the incompetent creator inadvertently mixed a spark of the highest spiritual reality into humanity. Like in one story, a drunk jeweler persuaded the creator to mix gold with lead, I think it was. So locked within the material shell of the human race is this spark of ultimate spiritual reality. So Gnostics hold to a very simple equation. Spirit is good, matter is evil. Spirit is desirable, matter is detestable. Salvation in Gnostic thought is actually pretty close to Buddhism. We are saved not from sin, we're saved from ignorance. So salvation is about enlightenment, at least for some of us. If the spark of spiritual reality can be fanned into flame, then it can evolve back into perfection through a process of self-discovery. A Christian might wonder how Jesus Christ fits into this story. Well, says the Gnostic, Christ has no relationship to the incompetent creator God. He comes from the higher levels of the intermediary beings, not as a saviour, but as a revealer of knowledge. In one of the so-called Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, or is reputed to say, the kingdom is inside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known. Now that's pure psychobabble, and you find more of that psychobabble in the Gospel of Thomas. According to Thomas, the writer of that false gospel, Jesus speaks secret words to his inner cabal of followers. He says, he who has known himself has already achieved knowledge of the depth of the all.
Those false ideas infected the early church, and they help us better understand some of Paul and John's writings. John said in his first epistle, by this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist. We live in a culture that doesn't believe that Jesus Christ was divine, but the Gnostic culture of John's day didn't believe that Jesus Christ was a man, and that was because the Gnostics thought that matter was evil and detestable. So the story of the incarnation, the Word becoming flesh, was deeply offensive to them.
That's right. You get the same hints of Gnostic heresy in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul asks the Corinthians, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Now, what the apostle is doing here is countering a Gnostic idea that had infected the Corinthian church. There were people who said it was perfectly okay for a Christian to sleep with a prostitute because it was just a bodily thing, and bodies were detestable and evil old things, so we can do with them whatever we want.
In that chapter, Paul goes on to say, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? So Christianity has a very high view of the body. It sees each of us as a unified person made up of body, soul, and spirit. I can see how Gnosticism has come back to haunt us when we consider things like transgenderism. Transgender ideology reduces the body to a vehicle that the real person inside can do whatever they want to. I am not my body is a slogan often used by the trans community. So there is a clear line of sight from transgenderism back to Gnosticism. But I'm wondering how we get from Gnosticism to the metaverse.
Well, go back to the conversation we had about the experience of presence in an immersive online world. In the metaverse, I am represented by my avatar. So I have separated my real physical body from myself that lives in the metaverse. I dress my avatar. It speaks when I speak. It smiles when I smile. But it is not my real body. So my actual body has been largely excluded from the world I inhabit. And that is a Gnostic concept. We are going to use technology to abstract ourselves out of the real world, out of the world of dirt and wrinkles, into an invented world. Do that for any length of time, and it won't just be transgender people who say, I am not my body. Scripture says, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. We are persons, unified persons, made up of body, soul, and spirit. So it cannot be right to lapse into a world that divides us up. So my advice is this. Go live in the real world. Encourage your kids to chase chickens or count the leaves on a stalk of wild grass. Smile when they jump in puddles or get out of breath from chasing the family dog. At a deeper level, encourage them to appreciate what you might call the realness of reality, the pushback from real reality. When they cry because they've bumped into a sharp rock, teach them that in the real world, actions have consequences. Don't allow them to retreat into a virtual world where they need take no responsibility, where actions have no consequences. Give them the courage to stand up against the great corporations, the political lobbyists who will try to control how they think. And the only way they will survive is if you have trained them to enjoy life outside of the Matrix, which I think is the real name for the metaverse.
Thanks, Jim. We'll be back next week for a bonus episode on the origins of war. But until then, we hope you all have a very good week.